Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the biggest forces in technology, the cloud. You hear about it all the time, right? Well, we're going to pull back the curtain on Google Cloud specifically and really get into what makes it tick.
So let's start with the big one. We all say the cloud, but if you had to explain it right here, right now, could you? It kind of feels like this abstract thing just floating out there. But the cloud is very, very real, and it has a super specific definition.
And to get it right, we're not just going to guess. We're going to start with the official definition. It actually comes from the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and they broke it down into five and only five essential traits. Okay, so what makes the cloud the cloud? It's these five things all working together. First, on-demand self-service. That means you can get computing power whenever you want without having to ask anyone. Second, broad network access. You can get to it from anywhere. Now, how do they do that? Through resource pooling, creating these gigantic shared collections of resources. But here's the real magic, rapid elasticity. That's the power to scale up or down in an instant. And finally, it's a measured service, which means you only pay for what you actually use. Here's the kicker. If a service doesn't have all five of these, it's not technically the cloud. But why did this model take over everything? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, to really get it, we need to take a quick look back at how we even got here. It really happened in about three waves. The first wave was co-location. This is where companies would literally just rent a rack or some space in a data center. Then came the second wave, virtualization. This was a huge step because now you could rent virtual machines, but you still had to manage a lot of the underlying stuff yourself. And that brings us to the third wave, the true automated cloud, which Google really pioneered. It's all built on this idea of containers. Think of them like these little self-contained packages for your code that make all that automation and elasticity possible. And this third wave, it didn't just change the tech, it completely changed the business model. It gave us two main ways to use cloud services: infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, and platform as a service, or PaaS. So what's the difference? It really comes down to what you're actually getting. With IaaS, you get the raw building blocks, the compute, the storage, the networking. It's kind of like renting the engine and the chassis of a car. You've still got to build the rest of it yourself. Google's compute engine is a perfect example of this. But with PaaS, you get a fully managed platform. All you do is bring your code. This is like leasing a car that's totally ready to go. You just hop in and drive. And that's exactly what Google's App Engine does for you. And this difference carries over to how you pay, which, let's be honest, is a huge deal. With IaaS, you usually pay for the resources you allocate ahead of time, whether you use them or not. But with PaaS, you often pay only for what your application actually consumes. And that shift can make a massive difference to your bottom line. Right, so all these services, IaaS, PaaS, all of it, they have to run on something real, something physical. And in Google's case, they run on one of the most advanced physical networks ever created. I mean, we are talking about an investment of billions and billions of dollars over many, many years. This isn't just a bunch of servers cobbled together. No way. This is a purpose-built global network designed from the ground up for insane speeds and incredibly low delays. So, how is a network this massive even organized? Well, at the very highest level, you have locations. You can just think of these as the big geographic areas, like continents, North America, Europe, Asia, where Google has a physical presence. Okay, let's zoom in a little from a location. Now you'll find regions. A region is an independent area, like, say, London. And the really important thing to know is that a single region is made up of multiple, totally separate data centers. And that brings us to the most detailed level, the zone. A zone is basically a single data center building. And here's where the cloud magic really happens. You can spread your application across multiple zones inside a region. So if one whole data center has a problem, like a massive power outage, your application just keeps on running in the other zones. That is the secret sauce to building an app that just doesn't fail. So remember, locations contain regions, and regions are made up of zones. So we've got the tech, we've got the map of the world, but beyond all that, Google Cloud is really built on a few core principles that define its entire philosophy. Let's dig into three of the biggest ones: how it's secure, open, and green. Okay, first up, security. Think about this. Google runs 9 different services that each have over 1 billion users. So for them, Security isn't just some feature you add on later, it is baked into every single layer, from the custom computer chips all the way up.
And I mean, they start at the most fundamental level you can imagine, with hardware that they design themselves. We're talking custom server boards, their own networking gear, even their own security chips. They control the entire boot up process with cryptographic keys to make sure nothing has been messed with. And that's all before you even start talking about the layers and layers of physical security at the actual data centers.
So what happens once your data is on the platform? Well, by default, it is automatically encrypted when it's just sitting there on a desk. We call that encryption at rest. When that data is moving over the internet, it's handled by something called the Google front end, which makes sure all that traffic is secure. And because the network is just so enormous, it can absorb massive cyber attacks with even more layers of protection on top of that.
All right, let's talk about the next big idea, being open. This quote really hits on a huge fear that companies have when they think about the cloud. What happens if I build everything on one provider and then I can't leave? It's a real problem called vendor lock-in.
Google's answer to this fear is a really deep commitment to open source. They actually created game-changing technologies like Kubernetes and TensorFlow, and then they just gave them to the world. By building on these open standards, customers are never trapped. They can mix and match services from different clouds if they want to. It gives them true freedom and flexibility. And what about that third principle, sustainability? Here's a wild fact. Data centers use a massive chunk of the world's electricity. To tackle this, Google's been on a long journey. Just look at this timeline. In its first decade, Google went carbon neutral. In its second decade, it hit 100% renewable energy matching, and the goal for 2030? To run completely carbon-free 24/7. That is a huge, huge commitment.
Okay, we've talked tech, we've talked network, we've talked philosophy, but let's get down to brass tacks. For anyone actually using this stuff, one of the biggest questions is, how do I control my costs?
Well, Google Cloud has some really customer-friendly pricing principles. For instance, they were the first major cloud to offer per-second billing, so you're not paying for a whole minute or an hour you didn't even use. They also give you automatic discounts for virtual machines you run for a long time. You can even create custom machine types, so you pay for exactly the amount of CPU and memory you need and nothing more. And they give you a whole toolkit to manage it all. You can set hard budgets for your projects. You can create alerts that send you a message when you're getting close to those limits. There are awesome visual tools to see exactly where your money is going, service by service. And finally, you can use quotas to prevent yourself from, say, accidentally spinning up 1,000 machines and getting a terrifying bill. It is all about putting you, the customer, in control. So when you put it all together, you can see this incredible evolution from just renting some space in a building to this powerful, secure, global platform. The thinking at Google is that every company going forward is going to be a data company. That's how they'll compete. And that technology is going to be built on the cloud, which kind of leaves us with one final question to think about. How will you use it to build what's next?